Something which came to fruition for my first guest this morning was success in the very hard area of music. Although we know him not only for his great music with Midnight Oil, we also know him as very clear-thinking and also, very importantly, a very emotional feeling person about issues which are important to everybody, but he's always had the guts to come out and speak publicly about same. Welcome to our show, Peter Garrett. Peter, welcome back.
Thanks very much.
I don't suppose any viewer this morning would need to be a Rhodes Scholar to work out precisely what I'd like to talk to you about first. As we discussed very briefly before coming on air, life for all of us seemed to be going along pretty nicely. Then all of a sudden, unfortunately, our friends from France decided to do it again and threw the whole thing into turmoil. And just before I let you have your speak, I suppose it's important to point out that 10 years ago, it didn't really mean all that much to us. Now, so many more people realise that this is not just something that shouldn't happen. This is something that must not happen.
I think we've seen an incredible change in public opinion, Bert, where everybody around the world recognises that this thing that was nuclear was something that we needed to come to terms with and really start to clean up the planet from the mess that's already been made, start to disarm, start to recognise that the kind of legacy that radioactivity has is very long-lasting. It's not good for us at all, for ourselves, for our environment, for our kids. And the French action is a step completely in the wrong direction. And there's no reasons for it whatsoever. They haven't advanced any good reasons for it. They're doing it in our part of the world. And I think that, you know, what was a minority feeling 10 or 15 years ago when we were taking boats out to Sydney Harbour to try and stop the warships has now become a majority feeling. And of course, now that it's a majority feeling, we need to translate it into the kind of action that will stop the French. You
said something just before coming on air, which I think is fascinating. The one thing that we have to do anyway for world peace, and also to keep this planet, you know, as healthy and as well as it possibly can be, is to understand that we are built on various cultures. And I think, as wonderful a people as Australia is, I don't think sometimes we fully understand that not everyone in the world is, you know, thinks the same way as we do. There is a different history to other people. There is a different culture. And I asked you before coming on here, I said, well, how could they possibly get away with it? How could the government get away with it in France? And your answer was that politically, leaders over there are seen in a very different light, aren't they?
Yeah, we've got a very robust democracy here. I mean, it's one of the great things about Australia. We tend to be knockers. There's a bit of that knocking thing in our character. But we do have a very robust democracy. We do have a lot of information coming to people. In France, the President of France is a little bit like the President of the US, but sort of a cross between the President and the King of the Queen. A lot of prestige in their position. President Chirac has always been extremely pro-nuclear. He has strong political linkages with the military, those parts of the Defence Force that think that they need to have new nuclear weapons. God knows where they're going to use them, but they think that they need to have them. He's only recently elected, and he's elected in a time which is very interesting in Europe, because the European Union's starting to come together. The Chancellor of Germany has run his course, and I think President Chirac sees himself as sort of, you know, in a sense, the modern king of Europe. And he's sort of, you know, led with his fist with this outrageous action, a contemptuous action. And now, of course, pride comes before the fall, and he's teetering at the top of world opinion and sort of not wanting to go over.
Are you happy with that figure of what 60 to 70% of French people are against the testing? I would have thought it should have been much higher, but you pointed out to me something interesting.
Well, I think the media there has always covered up the tests. I mean, they've always been undertaken in secrecy. It's always been sold to the French as part of their national security interests. There's never really been a free media on the test, so I think a 60% figure of French people against it is very high. Remember that, you know, at least 95% of the Germans, the Scandinavians, the British, the North Americans are completely opposed to it. So, you know, the situation for us is a very simple one. We need our government not only to react to what the French do, but actually to be very progressive, to be very proactive. We need not to be exercising with the French militarily. We need to review our uranium sales issues, because Australian uranium still most likely can end up in these nuclear explosions, and I think that's something most Australians would really see as very regrettable.
Peter, were you surprised at the happenings on the Rainbow Warrior?
No, I think Greenpeace have always, in a sense, had this sort of thing with the French since the French sunk the boat 10 years ago, almost to the day in Auckland. The French have always had a sort of thing of, well, Greenpeace don't really have any rights to be here, and therefore we'll use whatever force we think is necessary. But I just reckon the time has come, you know. quite honestly, for governments who act in this way to be called to account. Mm-hmm. And the people of the South Pacific have suffered enormously. There's been hundreds of tests that have gone on. These tests are going to cost the French people, you know, nearly $1 billion. They're going to be used for weapons that they cannot use, conceivably, under any circumstances. It's happening in our part of the world. You know, we're a South Pacific country who, in 1973, we took the French to the World Court. Yeah. In 1973, we tendered evidence in the World Court that milk that Australian kids were drinking may have had radioactivity in it that came from these tests. So that's when they were atmospheric tests. And I mean, you just can't let off nuclear bombs in coral atolls anymore. Mm.
Peter, as we grow up and we read more, you suddenly realise that wars, certainly wars of modern times, are all about money. Is nuclear testing about money too? Is there a payoff?
I don't think so, Bert. I mean, I think that's really an interesting point, because whichever way you look at this sort of thing, you can't find a good reason for it happening. If it is about money, it's about the weapons manufacturers of France, who traditionally have seen the third world as being a place where they can sell their sophisticated weaponry. I mean, the French do have a very bad track record in the world on nuclear issues. They help the Israelis and the Pakistanis get their nuclear reactor capacity. They've always blocked things like the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. I mean, we've got a treaty now sitting in the world, which over 100 nations support, which says we're ready to stop testing. Mm-hmm. Because we think if you stop testing, then that pulls the whole nuclear industry down. But the French have got a very powerful weapons industry, and I think that they'd be in there saying, look, you know, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty aside, we reckon there's always going to be a few countries off to the side who want to buy this stuff, and we want to be the ones that sell it to them.
Peter, matter of interest, Midnight Oil, the band, is it big in France?
Yeah, the great irony, Bert, is that we've got a tremendous audience in France. It's probably one of the biggest markets for us. And we always, when we go there, play a song called Hercules, which we wrote 10 years ago. Yeah. We always get up and Rob Hurst, the drummer, gets up and says something in French about how we actually despise and resist and are angry about their testing. And the audience cheer wildly. Mm.
So, I mean, it's, with no doubt at all, the French people are against this. The one thing that holds them back from taking even more action is the fact that, as you say, politically the president is seen as some sort of royalty?
Yes, I think so, and I think the fact that their French pride, in a sense, is standing on the test of these 8 weapons. And really it's a nice historical issue for us. Thematically, it's a very big issue because the symbolisms are very clear. We're at the end of the 20th century. Should this behaviour be permitted, or should world opinion, countries that care, countries of the region, get together and work very, very progressively and forcefully in a peaceful direction? And I guess our hope, I mean, the citizens' protest is going to be enormous. We're going to have boats going out there, we're going to have rallies and marches on Bastille Day, which is tomorrow, right around Australia. And I really call upon ordinary men and women of Australia and children of Australia to let our government know that we expect them to do more. And I think we're seeing really some substantial political developments, particularly in Europe, and I think it's going to be very hard for the French to hang in.
Yeah, that's actually Friday, isn't it?
That's right, Friday. Yeah, Bastille Day.
Peter, just finally, with somebody who appears to me to have no bias, and that's probably one of the reasons why politically you wouldn't be successful, because you're too honest. You've got opinions and you've got feelings, but no bias.
Very strong opinions.
Yeah. How are we going politically in a domestic sense in Australia, do you think?
Oh, gee, that's a question that might send people out to the kitchen, Bert. I guess my feeling about it is that we're in a dangerous situation where people lose faith in the political process, even though the politicians sometimes give us reason for feeling contempt. I don't think there's a great deal between the two parties, but on the issues that count for me, things like environment, social welfare, progressive policies towards the arts, Labor, although they're tired, show a little bit more inclination to listen. But I think they've got to do a lot more. And I think for Australians, we've sort of got to look at that debt and we've got to say to ourselves, gee whiz, what kind of country do we want to have? Are we going to use up our resources in this kind of mad rush to pay off the debt? Or are we actually going to restructure the way that we live, start to live within our means, start to look after our country, because it's popular amongst tourists, it's popular for ourselves because of the reason it's clean and it's green. Yeah.
The answer would possibly be, if you could get a government which was brave enough and also was in a climate that was suitable for it, not to really have to concern themselves about the next 12 months, but maybe the next 12, 15, 20 years.
Well, I think we should have fixed terms. I think that the Parliament should sit for at least 4 terms so people can get on with it. I think the fact that we're constantly in this sort of knick-knack, sort of point and counterpoint is destructive for the politics. They should be able to do the sorts of things which initially might be a little bit unpopular, but ultimately would be for the greater good, and that's what you hope.
Terrific. Peter, lovely seeing you, as always. You're speaking in Sydney, in the middle of the city, at 4 o'clock on Friday, Bastille Day, and also there is a function in the city of Melbourne at 5 o'clock on Friday. But you're in Sydney, aren't you, for Friday? Yeah. As I say, great to see you, and it should be a very, very heavy day in the strictest sense of the word on Friday. Let's hope the message gets through. And we send a cheerio now to Gabrielle Gatte, who's going to Rosebud for Friday, I would imagine. Thanks for coming on the show this morning. Peter Garrett, always very welcome guest on Good Morning Australia. After the break...